Okay, so we're gonna start now with the next talk, and I'm super happy that we have a tribe called Red here on stage. Ehren Bear Witness Thomas and Tim Toolman Hill, and they're gonna perform tonight, of course, at Festsaal Kreuzberg. So they still have to go to the sound check. We will have to finish the talk in time, but I hope we also have a bit of time for answers, for a Q&A after the talk. And Lisa Blanning is our moderator for the talk, frequent collaborator with CTM. We're happy to have you back. She's a journalist since many years for various music publications, and now I hand over the stage to you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. We'll just delve right into it. So first, if it's not clear, there's Bear to my left and Tim on the end here. And the first thing I want to ask you guys is, what is it about A Tribe Called Quest that inspired you? Because clearly your name is a reference to A Tribe Called Quest.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's not as direct though. There's, like with everything we do, there's lots of layers. Our original name was Red-Handed. And that was a name that one of the original members had already used. So it was a really easy thing for us to just start to, he already had a logo and everything for it. So we ran with that name, but when he left the group, we decided, well, that was his name, so we should come up with something else. And we already had shows lined up and everything, so it was just a one-day brainstorming session, what should we call ourselves? And we were just firing things out, and Tribe Called Red was the thing that stuck. The criteria for the name was we wanted to have something that was inclusive of indigenous people of the Americas, and that also represented us as an urban indigenous group. So the words "a tribe called," that A Tribe Called Quest used, it's also used in powwow culture. So you'll see some powwow groups will have that written on, like, their jackets or shirts that they'll make up for themselves, and it'll be like "A Tribe Called" and then the name of their group. So it's something that we were referencing that we had seen in some parts of powwow culture, but that was also the automatic brings up A Tribe Called Quest and urban culture. And then the red part comes from the medicine wheel teaching. And in the medicine wheel, part of that teaching, it's the 4 directions and the 4 colors of the different directions, but those colors also relate back to the different peoples of the earth, and red is the color of the indigenous people of the Americas.
Okay, yeah, that there are a lot of layers there. So I mean, because I assumed that it had to do with your engagement with hip hop. And I assumed that meant that you were very big hip-hop fans.
We're that too.
Yes.
But often, in the early days, we'd always get, okay, so which one of you raps? Which is, we're not a hip-hop group. And I mean, even the music that we play, it's electronic based. I mean,
yes.
So it was always having to explain, no, we're not a hip-hop group, we don't rap. We play, dubstep and house and jungle. And
well, so, I mean, given that, although I am going to come back to that about the music that you play as DJs. What do you think about Drake and the current? Or do you feel connected to any of the other quote unquote hip hop acts that are happening out of Canada right now? Because this is actually seems like Canadian hip hop is now a thing. Canadian urban music in general, let's say.
Yeah. My come up was in when I first started making production. I used to hang out a lot in Toronto, so it's great seeing like a lot of the Toronto producers that I was hanging out with are now kind of shaping what hip hop music is right now, or what's on the charts. Like, it's crazy seeing like Billboard charts and being able to see that like 5 Friends have made it that far. Where they're on the top 10 or something like that. It's really insane. Or one of the Toronto producers right now, he's nominated for Producer of the Year with Kanye and Pharrell and 2 other rock producers. So it's like they're definitely doing that. But the people that are really running with the wave right now are the kids that are like younger than me. Like right now, it's got to be like 18 to like 24. They're just these young producers that created a wave that kind of started with this producer named Wonder Girl. she started doing this thing with the rolling 808s, and then all of a sudden, like, it just like she start taking over, and people started like taking that sound and kind of mimicking it. But Wonder Girl learned from Boy Wonder, the guy.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Who's one of Drake's collaborators.
Yeah. So I guess like for me, I guess like for a person that's kind of like grew up with hip hop, like right from like I've watched it kind of progress in Toronto. There was some things that I never really agreed with when it came with it, but like I've learned to to agree with it, I guess, or grew into liking it. You know, it took a lot of patience and understanding, but I found that, you know, me hanging out with all these younger kids and like understanding where they're coming from and what they're trying to do, I'm more about it now than I was maybe a couple of years ago, for sure.
That's interesting. And you were as you were saying, in terms of what you DJ, it's very obvious just listening to your records that you're very much into all sorts of different club sounds. You know, not just hip hop. But now, can you talk about specifically what it is about these various genres that appeals to you? That what you're looking for from any kind of music that makes you want to use it in the club as a DJ or use it in a track as a producer?
Well, I think when we were coming up, there was a real change in what was happening in DJ culture and like in electronic music culture, where it had switched from being, you know, the more in the 90s when it was like you were a house producer or you were a house DJ and that's all you did. And it wouldn't even be more specific than that. You made deep house, you made ragga jungle, and that was how you defined yourself. You know, when we were coming up more in, you know, the 2007, 8 kind of times, it became more about what the sound was at the moment, and you had to constantly be ready to go from making, you know, PBJ kind of club stuff to Mumbatone to, you know, there was just this constant rolling styles of music that was the more important part than being specific about it was being able to move from one style to the next and DJ through all those styles and to be producing music. You know, it switched from being either you were a producer or you were a DJ. You had to be DJ producers. So out of that, since we were people who were following all these musics in our DJing, when we started producing, it was really just about us putting that flavor on top of whatever type of music was hot in that moment. You know, that's how we ended up with the first track being dubstep. When we first, like the very, very first song that we did sampling powwow music was a song called Brave Step that we just did a mashup. You know, it was at the time when mashups were the big thing, and we just took a dubstep instrumental and threw a powwow song on top of it, and they were already at the same BPM and they clicked. So we realized really quickly that we could just kind of layer our powwow sound on top of all these different sounds. But I think the goal in that is something that goes back to my days growing up, going to raves and realizing that I was in the middle of, you know, what was really young people looking for what was missing, which is that rite of passage, you know, and that we were going out to these all-night parties to experience something together and to grow together, you know. But it was in this very you know, wild setting. There wasn't any way to lead it. There wasn't any ideology behind it, you know. So it was just kind of, I mean, it was dangerous in a way, you know, because you have all these people looking for something that's missing. As I started making my own music, I realized that, you know, you could take that framework and add an ideology into it, and add, you know, meaning to it, and kind of direct that energy. You know, and so that had been a goal of mine since I had been a partier and coming up. As a DJ, I always tried to inject, you know, as much of that as I could into what I was putting out. But it was always kind of a struggle looking for songs that were, you know, party songs that also carried a message. You know, I played a lot of jungle was a big thing for me, you know, because it was, you know, you had groups like Congo Natty or, you know, all these groups that were bringing culture into electronic music, and people who were from that culture, where electronic music has a real tendency to just take from other cultures. You know, you have like Asian Dub Foundation is another one where they, you know, it was actually people from that culture expressing themselves through electronic music. But it wasn't something that I ever saw being able to do with my own culture, since it was something where, so many people had appropriated it into electronic music already, that I didn't feel that we could use our culture in that way. Until our community said they wanted it. This whole project grew out of a club night that we started throwing called the Electric Powwow. At the time, we were a hip hop DJ, a dancehall DJ, and like a club DJ, like house music DJ, and we just threw like a regular party, but we advertised to our community. All types of indigenous people from our city showed up, and the reaction from our audience was, "You've created a safe space for us to come out in the city and enjoy ourselves, so you have to keep doing it." We had got all this support from our community through the party, and we wanted to give something back to our community, so that's where the idea to start remixing powwow music came in. And our community accepted it and allowed it and ran with it. And so that acceptance and that backing of the community was so important, because we were using our culture in a way that had been so misused in the past. So I really feel that when we started doing this, it was a moment where we were allowed to. Nobody ever told us to stop, and that we were breaking cultural boundaries or not following cultural protocols. So it's one of those things that I don't think could have happened before it did.
Yeah, this is really interesting. And another thing I had noticed that you had said in the past about Electric Powwow is that you had noticed that there were other parties for different groups of people in where you lived. Like, for instance, there were parties being thrown by Jamaicans and parties being thrown by Koreans, and you thought that helped spark this idea that you could do something for your own people. So or people that you wanted to give a platform to or something, and that actually makes it sound as though Ottawa is a much more multicultural place than I would have expected too. So that's interesting. But I want to, if you don't mind, can you maybe explain for us better, especially being in a place like Germany, the nature of a powwow, and maybe describe some of the characteristics of powwow music, and the history of it. Because I only know what I've never been to a proper powwow, and I only know what would be the stereotypes or what would be depicted in popular media.
Yeah, they would have a powwow where I live. I live on a reserve that's about a native reserve about an hour or so from Toronto. We'd have a powwow there every year. And I remember growing up there and going to see the powwow, and what was really cool about it was that the showcasing of the singing was great. But a lot of my people from my community who I used to, because we have our own music too, like we sing our own music, social songs and stuff. But we would see our singers go and participate in powwow, and that was like seeing like my heroes that I used to like look up to singing. They were singing as well. So being able to see that and engage in it was pretty cool. But it's basically a big drum, like the group, the drum. They usually call it like a drum, and there's a big drum in the middle. It could be anywhere from 4 singers sitting around it, or 15. It could have 3 women singers singing outside the circle. It all depends on the community and where they come from.
Okay, so basically vocals and percussion,
Yep.
and vocals can be quite arranged in lots of different ways, and you said it's social singing.
Well, for the powwow itself, it's for the powwow that I went to, it was a competition powwow. So they would invite drums from all across North America, and some from the States, some from Canada, and they would come in there. It would come there and participate and try to win. Right, so there would be like 15 drums. So they would set 15 drums in this humongous arbor, and in the middle of the arbor is where they would dance, and behind the drums would be the seating where people would watch everybody. And it's like the powwow drums were asked to sing different styles, so everybody had to come with their own game, with their own style. So there could be grass dance, could be like crow hop, could be straight up. But there's different styles and different competitions for the dancers to dance to, and then so the MC would be like, all right, Northern Cree, get ready to sing, like a fancy dance, so, and then that's how it would go down. People would throw down like that.
So there's also a ritualistic dance element to it. And I'm saying there's also there's call and response, yes or no?
The songs
depending on what group is using it.
Well, the way that the powwow songs are arranged, they play in they call them push-ups. So a push-up means one round through all the singers, and each singer takes a turn singing lead, and then everybody else does that's where the call and response comes in. But what is really interesting with powwow culture, and the reason that we specifically chose powwow music to remix, is that it's something that's celebrated across North America. And we're talking when you talk about North America, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of different nations and cultures that all have their own social songs, all have their own dances, all have different regalias that they wear. But all of that was banned, right? There was a cultural ban that lasted, I'm not sure how long the cultural ban lasted, but it was, probably close to 100 years, where we weren't allowed to gather in numbers, we weren't allowed to sing our songs, dress in our regalia, perform our dances, perform our ceremonies. All of that was illegal. During that time is when the Wild West shows became popular, because this was the end of the Wild West, right? This is when the idea was that indigenous people had been subjugated, had been wiped out, annihilated. And they moved us onto reservations to kill our culture. You were forced to live in land that wasn't your traditional land. You were forced, many people who weren't agricultural were forced into farming. You had a thing called an Indian agent, who you had to ask and get written permission to be able to leave your community. While all this is happening, these Wild West shows are going on, like Wild Bill and all of that, where they're having these cowboy performances and stuff. You could dress in your regalia, you could sing your songs and do your dances as part of the Wild West shows.
Oh my God.
So, that's it, yes. There was a way, though. It was a way that people were still, you could leave your community, you could go out and do and perform, and the culture survived through the cultural ban, as becoming performative. The powwow culture itself is specific to the plains. That's where it came from. That's where the tradition goes back generations and generations, and pre-colonial tradition of powwow, where it was more connected to ceremony. The powwow that we celebrate today, where it's across North America, everybody doing the same style of singing that Tim was explaining around the big drum, those style of songs that are based in Plains culture, we all do it now. And we all dress in these regalias that are based off of Plains culture regalia. So we chose powwow music specifically because it's become something universal to the Americas that everybody can be connected to. So again, like choosing red in our name because everybody recognizes that as our color, we chose powwow music because everybody recognizes that as a culture that we all participate in now.
Like an elemental force for the culture.
Yeah.
That's very interesting, and I also I wondered whether there were certain standards within the songs, like do they tell certain tales? And the reason I'm asking is because Katarina Baruch played CTM earlier this week, and she's a Sami vocalist, indigenous to northern Scandinavia, and of course Tanya Tagaq is one of your collaborators, and I wondered, even though they come from a different kind of indigenous culture, do you feel more connected to that than say Drake?
100%.
I don't know if I'm more connected.
It can be both.
Yeah, those you brought up the two things that make our group.
True.
But one of the things that's quite obviously links something like rave music or club music and powwow to me as an outsider listening would be sort of this use of the ecstatic, the sort of like heightened energy and obviously the idea of a communion or a communal experience.
That's the part that we didn't bring up at all, was the community part of powwow. And this is really, I mean, yes, we're sampling powwow music, but it was the community part that really made us feel like we were continuing that powwow culture and having a place for people to gather and have a place for people to come together within the urban environment. Because we generally don't have those places because we're not supposed to be in the city, right? We're supposed to be on our little pieces of land that we've been delegated to, which is, nothing could be further from the truth. There's been indigenous people involved in the urban environments of North America since they were still forts. You know, we've always been right beside them. My family goes back, 4 generations in New York City. Like, we are urban people just as much as we are people from our reservations and community. I mean, Tim and I are a really good example of that. We're from the same community, but I grew up in the city and he grew up, in our community. But trying to claim space within the urban environment has always been very challenging. As soon as you move to the city, like in our grandparents' generation, the move was to move to the city to give your family a better life. But at that time, it meant giving up culture. If you were gonna, like when my family, like Tim speaks our language, I don't. Because his family, they grew up in the community. He grew up, going to Longhouse and being involved in our community. I mean, I did as well, but as an outsider, as somebody who grew up in the city and coming from a family that decided to do that. The thing that's really similar is that in our parents' generation, it was about reclaiming the things that our grandparents had given up. So like our language was dying out. So there was this huge push to have immersion schools. And that's what Tim went through.
I went through that. That was like the second wave of children to go through full immersion without, because we have to pick like another language to learn. And instead of learning French or Spanish, I learned my own. So that was there was really eager. It was like there's really urgent feeling between, like, even as like a 4-year-old going into school, that they let it really be known that, hey, like, we're down to our last few speakers ever, so you need to learn now. And as a kid, like, growing up with that kind of pressure, it's kind of crazy. But I took to it really easy. I was lucky. Like, a lot of kids didn't really take to it, but I learned it real quick. Mostly because, like, my father took initiative too, and when he saw that he was gonna have a kid, he actually went in and just said, all right, I'm gonna go learn as much as possible. And then he picked it up as well. And then so I was able to hear it at home and a lot of that stuff. But that's kind of like where that side of the thing came from.
So then the kind of the urban flip to that is, in my generation, we, since the communities were growing stronger again, language is coming back, and there's a whole new resurgence of young people being involved in culture. In the cities, we finally started to define what the urban indigenous culture looked like. Very much my parents, who are both artists, were part of helping, create what is now the urban indigenous culture. But when I was growing up, there was, in Toronto, a handful of indigenous people who were there and identifying and being part of the culture. Now it's a huge culture. I mean, we exist because there is that urban indigenous culture now, and I feel like having things like the electric powwow have really helped to facilitate that culture defining itself.
And there is something. The other thing is that families back home too. Some families, like, they understand that people have talents that need to go beyond, like learning the language or learning the culture and stuff. So if they see a talent into somebody, they usually just send them out. They're like, all right, you need to go out there and you need to learn. But it's a family decision, kind of feels like. So, like, that usually means go out there, do your thing. We're going to handle back home. So then, like, whatever, like, so if when you come back, all of this will be here for you and ready to go. He comes from a family that really blossomed in the past probably 30 years, and they've become like leaders in my community, in our community. So it feels nice. And same thing with my father. He's like, like, proud of you, what you're doing, like, go out there and keep doing the stuff, and like when you come back, like, it's all gonna be here. And it's always my intention to go back home. It's always my intention. Even like whatever tribe does, the successes that we accumulate and whatever we do, it feels great to be able to play a show back home, because we do that, or we bring all of our successes back home, because everybody kind of claims us as like, yeah, that's my cousin, or that's my, that's my brother, that's my sister. And like being able to like go out into the world, tour and do stuff, and being able to have that, like people from our community can see that. And now like I guess when I first started, like, it wasn't really there as much. It wasn't as big, but like now there's like, there's a handful of music producers when I was like one of two when I first started, and now there's a lot more that's growing, or and it's crazy to see how the family kind of reacts to your talents and kind of like makes the decisions to go out there. But we've been doing that for generations. It's been going on for a long time. Like we realize that not everybody can do one thing. It's like, or like it's a community effort. Everybody has to be good at something and come together. We'll know how to do most things.
Well, that's funny, because that dovetails with something else I wanted to ask you. Now, you said earlier that no one's told you to stop. So what's the reaction from elder people in various tribes to your music?
Yeah, that's it's always been something that I've been worried about in the back of my head, because there are protocols when it comes to dealing with things like powwow music. There's definitely, our fan base, runs from 3 years old to 80 years old. Like you'll see elders at our shows, and there's people who don't like what we do, and that's why I've always been surprised that nobody's ever come and said, you guys aren't, you can't do that. There's some uncomfortability, and not just from elders, but through a lot of different people, that we're doing this in club environments. We're doing it in an environment where alcohol is being served, which is you don't mix those two things at all. But we don't mix those two things. There might be people at our shows who are drinking or whatever, but we don't drink when we perform. We don't that we don't cross those lines. We try to adhere to the protocols of the music as much as we can. So even when there's been elders who don't necessarily like what we do, there's always a general feeling of they see the importance of what we're doing, because we're interacting with youth, that we are creating an environment for our youth to interact with our traditions in another way, and maybe become more involved, but if nothing else, become more proud of who they are, and watch people from outside our culture interact with our music. I think that's a big thing for a lot of people when they come. They come not only expecting to see indigenous people playing and expect to be in an environment where there's other indigenous people having a good time, but then they get there and they're like, whoa, there's all these non-indigenous people here who are enjoying this too. And that's a huge light that turns on for people to say, wow, like non-indigenous people can actually respect and enjoy our culture. Like that blows people's minds. I remember there's a comedy group who is really close friends of ours called the 1491s, and we did a show with them once in Ottawa, and they kind of did an opening set, and they had to leave early the next morning, and they're like, okay, we're gonna go now. Okay, let's talk to you guys later. And this is at the time we only had about 4 or 5 songs, so there was just one point in the night where we play all our powwow songs. And that was like, around 12:30, 1 a.m. So they're getting ready to go, and I'm like, no, go, guys, you got to stay. You're about to see white people dance to powwow music. And they just looked at me, and they're like, what do you? And you see them turn over to the other guys, like, no, we can't leave, man. We can't leave. We got to see what's going to happen here. And just that idea that we're not invisible. That we can be seen, especially in the urban environment. Because of these, like the Wild West shows and those sort of things, we're accepted in beads and feathers. We're accepted if we're performing traditions. But to be seen in the world as the people that we see ourselves as today, and to be seen in the world performing something that isn't just tradition, that isn't just rooted in the past, is a massive step. And I think being that example, especially for young people, is very potent. We have an epidemic of suicide in young people. And we have young people who, before the age of 10 years old, have given up. They've given up on being able to see their lives outside of the community where there isn't always a lot happening. So if we can be out here in the world to be that example, I don't know, it's just something that's really important to us as a group.
Yes, I could see definitely how that would be important, not just to you, but to other people.
Yeah, so I think that's where the elders in our community see that importance, that they see the pride in the kids, and that's a huge part of our mission.
That's fantastic. That means you're really achieving something. So you've touched on this already, but do you think the climate around the issues you highlight has changed since you started your career?
There seems to be like a shift in consciousness, it seems, over the last couple of years, especially. People are having these conversations now. But it also comes to like, with the Canadian government, I guess you can say that they started implementing education on something as simple as like the residential schools and like how we got to where we are today. They teach it in high schools now. So you're seeing a lot of 19-year-olds at our shows that come up to us and afterwards and say like I had no idea growing up that this was going on. I didn't learn until either today in university or I learned in high school. It just seems like there's this conversation is starting to happen between native and non-native people basically, and there's a lot less ignorance going around. I mean, it's still there. Like it's still there. It's like that's basically what it is. There's been this fracture of communication between us because it's all led by assumptions of who we are and like stereotypes. It's so strong. So like I think by being in a DJ group as a collective like how we are, we're able to represent ourselves the way we want to be seen. It's shocking for people. It's shocking to see two guys, native DJs, you know what I mean? It's like and to play powwow music like remixed the way it is, like it's shocking for people to see that. And then now it's I think we've been doing this for the tribe's been existed for 10 years now, or over 10 years now. So now it's kind of becoming like kids are growing up with us, and now it seems to be like this is more normal. So like that it's a beautiful thing that's kind of happening right now where the younger people seem to take an initiative to learn more, or to just this is more of a normal thing. And I think if more people are able to do this, like say now that there's a handful of other producers on Six Nations, for example, younger kids, like they can come up and this is more of a normal thing to them. And the more and more that happens, we're starting to see, my first example was that I used to like watching action movies when I was a kid, still do, but like Die Hard with a Vengeance had this native guy named Graham Greene from my community, Six Nations, and just being able to see him on a movie like that, it meant a lot, the world to me. I still talk about it to this day, and so like I think that now we have clothing brands that are coming out, native clothing brands, so we can rep our own stuff. Companies like Nike are doing the N7 initiative, which is basically they give programs to reservations in the America, and I think in Canada now too. They're making their way up to Canada now. But they also make like specific shoes for because natives have different feet, so they have this special kind of shoe that you can have that's a little bit wider.
The Ehren natives.
Yeah, but also like it also gave chance for like indigenous for native designers to design a Jordan. You know what I mean? Like to design like shoes. So now like we have like these designers that are coming up in every 2 seasons a year are developing their own clothing line, basically using the Nike brand and using Nike shoes. So even making their own shoes. So it's there's something that's happening right now within like and we're not leading the conversation or anything. We're just a part of it, and like there's an indigenous renaissance kind of happening, and it's pretty interesting. It's like it's because we have our heads down most times, and we're working, we're out touring, we're out doing a bunch of stuff. So when we get a chance to pop our head up and we see what's going on out there, there's some really incredible stuff happening.
I think people see us connected to youth culture a lot because of the type of music we play and stuff, but we're not the young guys anymore. Like I'm 41. Like we're not the youth in our community by any means. And now we're starting to see that next wave of indigenous artists coming out. And a couple of the ones who are on the front lines, people like Jeremy Dutcher or the Snotty Nose Rez Kids, who in interviews now have talked about growing up with our music. And that kind of was one of those moments where it was a head scratcher for me. I'm like, oh yeah, so there is these guys that were 15, 16 when we started, who have now gone through those formative years with us in their lives, and now they're out there and winning awards. Like Jeremy Dutcher just won the Polaris Prize, which is probably the largest music prize you could win in Canada. Like it's amazing to see, and I've always known that what we were doing was kind of almost a bump in the road to what was going to come next. We didn't come out of a void. We come from a long tradition and history of indigenous excellence in arts and culture, and the artists that came before us, we definitely are standing on their shoulders, but they hit a ceiling that we managed to break through. And I don't think that has anything to do with how talented we are. I don't think it has anything to do with what we do musically. It has to do with the moment that we came around. Right. We came at a time when people outside of the indigenous community decided that it was okay, or it was just the time for it to happen, that we were going to listen to people from indigenous communities and allow our voice to be carried outside of our community. One of the people who definitely led the way for us is Buffy Sainte-Marie, and probably one of the most well-known indigenous musicians, but she was blackballed for decades because she was political. She came up in that whole Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell folk scene, but because of her political views, totally blackballed from the music industry. We grew up seeing her on Sesame Street and those sort of things. So that was a huge thing. See, like as Tim was saying before, when you see a face finally in the media that you can recognize, that represents you, it's massive. But even even Buffy didn't get what she deserved out of her career. Now, she's getting a huge resurgence. She never went anywhere, but she's getting a lot more attention again, and that's amazing to see. But you were talking about what's changed, or you're asking about what's changed since we've been doing what we do. I think when you look at what's changed since Buffy started to where we are today, we got this amazing opportunity for one of the other huge awards in Canada, the Junos, where they do like a musical number off the top, like any kind of music awards show. And usually it's like a 6-minute thing, and they usually go to 3 different bands, and 3 different bands get 2 minutes each to play part of their song. They gave us the whole 6 minutes. So we created this whole show with one of the drum groups, Black Bear, and Tanya Tagaq came and performed, and we kind of took ourselves out of it and allowed all these other acts to shine. There was just like one moment when we had John Trudell speaking, where we came up and stood on stage just to hold space, because John had already passed at that point. So we were just there to hold the space for his voice. It was kind of the only moment we kind of appeared during this whole 6 minutes. One part of it that we didn't organize was that the Junos got Buffy to come and introduce all of that. And that wasn't something that we knew. We kind of got there for rehearsal and they're, oh yeah, well, Buffy's going to introduce you guys. This is amazing. I mean, she's somebody that we've known and worked with before, but it was just, to have her introduce us is already a massive thing. So we were there, and it's a live taping. Buffy comes off stage from introducing us, and she came and stood next to me, and I just wanted to say, thank you so much. It means so much to have you introducing us here. And she squeezed my hand and looked up at me and said, Barrett, used to just be me here.
that must be a very good feeling for her to see this happening now. And I'm wondering, how has A Tribe Called Red project changed the way you feel about yourselves as Indigenous people?
Well, it changed me drastically. Or not drastically, but it changed me definitely. So I was one of those fans that saw Tribe. I'm not original member, so like, I remember seeing Tribe for the first time. And I remember, I knew them as people before, like I saw them perform, because they're DJs and I make beats. So it was kind of like, you know, native community is kind of small when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's like anybody's doing DJing in the community or making beats or raps or sings or whatever. Like we tend to know about each other. And I remember going to see them for the first time, and it was like, I remember looking at the crowd and looking at everybody smiling, but it was like a proud smile. It was something, it was powerful, and it was something like, it was definitely like a holy shit moment. Like I was like, there's something going on out here. Like it's like, I feel it, and I'm receiving it the same way, but like I just more or less looked at them. And I was like, okay, these guys are important. You know, this is something that needs to continue. When I got a chance to join, I never realized it until about a year or so in it. But before I joined Tribe, I made hip hop beats for everybody. You know, I worked with all different types of people, and I worked on metal albums, you know, and R&B and stuff. And then it wasn't until, but I kept my culture and the music separate most times, and it was like just a decision I wanted to make. But when I joined, I realized that before it was really a lot of work to separate myself from stuff. It was separate them both. So, but when I joined Tribe, it was the first time that I was ever able to take my life and my music life and combine them together. And it was the first time that I've ever felt 100% honest with myself. I don't have to do anything special other than be me now. And it's like it was a redefining moment and a eureka moment, and now everything is just kind of effortless at this point, because it's just I just have to do whatever I do. So it was a challenge for the last record, because like we did songs without using powwow in it, and that's kind of something that we kind of realized, and some people were kind of like upset with it to an extent, but the thing that people have to realize is that whether if I make if we make a rock track or anything without any powwow vocals in it, because we made it, is going to be native regardless, because native people made it. So it's like it was like a lot of this is just self-realization, and a lot of it has to do with just like fixing the things that's happened in the past. So to my people and to whatever, because of the bands and all this kind of stuff, like keeping everything kind of sacred and hidden away, like, you know, this is very precious to me, because I was dealing with a language that was going extinct, and I was dealing with a culture that's like, you know, that I know because I used to go and there would be barely anybody there to put it on at the very, like when I was a kid, to it resurging and everything's good. So now we're kind of plentiful and everything's kind of good. And the biggest thing that happened was that my father never really liked me doing this kind of doing music at all, but I used to do it anyway because I loved it. And now he just brags to all his friends and stuff like that, and it's pretty cool. But yeah, a lot of it was just basically just undoing the thing that's been happening in our community forever, and now hopefully, you know, the next generation doesn't have to go through these little mind things that I had to go through, and hopefully everybody can just be themselves, like, you know, they can, and from that on it's like a lot more freeing and honest, and it feels great.
Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I guess for me, like I said, my parents or my family are artists, so I grew up in the arts community, in the indigenous arts community. To me, that's really who my community is. My mom's an actor. My grandmother and my two great aunts have a theater company based in New York City called Spider Woman Theater. That's the longest consecutively running women's theater company in North America, I think. They've toured the world like when I was a kid, and my mom as well was the second artistic director of Native Earth, which is like kind of the first big Native theater company in Canada. So they were, my family was very involved in creating a scene, and a scene that was very important to the continuation and development of a modern indigenous culture. They've worked really hard at creating an indigenous framework within theater. My grandmother, my great aunts come from that generation where you weren't just an actor, you learned to sing, dance, and act, and they were all professionally trained. My mom, professionally trained actor, she's a Shakespearean, like she can do all of that stuff, but their goal was to unlearn all of that stuff and figure out how we could have a theater practice that was based in an indigenous framework. My father's a photographer, very much the same thing. So it's been my goal or a dream or something, what I've always wanted out of life was, since I grew up watching them doing that and kind of being a part of it as being a child, I wanted that for myself. I wanted to be part of a cultural defining movement. And when Tribe started to catch on, and I started seeing the culture that was developing around it, that was developing that we were following, I finally felt that I found that home for myself. And I think I spent a lot of time throughout my younger life searching for what that was going to be for myself, how I was going to find that defining thing. And like I said, it found me.
This is actually quite inspiring, I have to say, because the idea of being able to be true to yourself and also express your interests in a modern world, which is just more confusing by the minute, is it's really nice to hear. We have time for a few questions from the audience if anybody has something that they'd like to ask.
Maybe I can start. I wondered if you can tell us a bit, well, first of all, thanks for sharing all of that. Really great to hear. Can you tell us a bit about the Halluci Nation, the idea of the album, that your latest album, basically, and the idea of that Halluci Nation that you were expressing there?
Yeah, the concept of the hallucination came from John Trudell. John Trudell is a huge figure in the indigenous community. He started off as a political activist, was involved with the American Indian movement, but eventually left that movement and became a poet and a musician, a philosopher, and was somebody who was a huge figure in my life. He saw the music that we heard growing up. It was always a dream to be able. He was kind of like on the top of the list of people that we would dream to work with. And after a few years of close running-ins with him, and hearing that he knew who we were and wanted to meet us, we finally met him. And within the first 5 minutes of meeting him, he said, "Well, if I wrote a couple things down and gave it to you, you think you'd be interested in using that?" Which was just like, oh my God, I can't believe John Trudell's initiating this collaboration. Once we started working with him, he had originally sent us a poem called "The Tribe Called Red" that he wrote for us, and we got him into the studio in San Francisco, and he recorded it and sent it to us. And the end of his email was like, "Oh, here's the poem that I wrote for you, and I tagged on another little thing on the end there. Maybe you can use that too. I don't know." And at the time, we knew that this album was going to be a collaborative album, that we wanted to work with as many of the people who had become part of our extended family as we could. We also knew that we wanted to expand what we had done in the past, which had just been make club tracks, almost like just collections of singles. We wanted to make an album that was a concept album, that expressed more feeling than just club tracks. trying to come up with the concept went through a lot of different phases. Started off in a superhero idea. Like we were the original members of the Justice League and we were going out to find all the other heroes who were going to help come make us a stronger team. And then that idea started to grow into, we had started wearing bandanas on our faces when we played. And the idea of how grassroots or indigenous movements, or when you have nothing left to fight with than your own body, you still have to protect the people you love. So that was such a symbol of an indigenous-led or a grassroots-led movement, was to cover your face like that. So I started thinking about the idea of outlaws and bandits and how being on the other side of history could turn you into an outlaw, and connecting with that idea. So we were like the Magnificent Seven, and we were going out to find the rest of our posse. And then John Trudell sent us this recording, and the thing that he tagged on to the end was the Hallucination Poem. And as soon as we heard that, it was like, this is it. This is the story of these people. We kind of filled in the blanks of his poem with kind of some more like sci-fi ideas that we had been thinking about that involved an indigenous-led movement in a dystopian future that had gone back to natural law and natural ways of life, and that's who the Hallucination were. I was getting lost here in myself. So John, like, it was based on the ideas that John gave us, and we kind of expanded into this whole other world. The more, I guess, physical and immediate idea of the hallucination was that, we had dealt with this whole thing with red face, people showing up with war paint or showing up with headdresses, non-indigenous people doing these kind of things at our shows. When we confront them and have conversations with people, when you can get out of just the, this is offensive, you're pissing me off kind of thing, and actually sit down and have a conversation about what's going on, the first reaction that almost everybody had was, I want to honor what you're doing. I want to be part of what you're doing. What you're doing is so powerful that I want this for myself as well. And that goes back to the original ideas that I got from going to raves, where I wanted to create something more out of all this wild energy that we had as young people. So the hallucination became a way that we, one of the first things we did is we made the seal that's on the front, on the cover of the album. We made that patch. That was like almost months into it. We actually hadn't even told John Trudell that we were naming the album that yet, and we already had the patch. And I had to write to John and be like, oh, hey man, we're kind of making your poem the whole album, and we're going to name the album after it, and we want to start this movement of the hallucination, and here's the seal we made, and it's a patch, and we're going to be able to give that to everybody so they don't have to show up in headdresses and war paint, and it's not appropriate if we're actually making this for everybody. I hope you're okay with that. Like, I hope that was, what you wanted out of giving us this poem. And all he wrote back to me was, thank you, the hallucination is real. So that's that. It was something that we're able to give to everybody to be a part of.
Thank you. Did anyone else there's a couple of hands in the back there.
Hello? Yes. Thank you so much, and thank you for showing the emotion that you expressed in regards to the suicides, and I think that just shows the embodiment of your care and love in what you're doing. Coming off of the last question and answer, I was curious to know what your embodiment of your spirituality was in your creative process, and also whether you had any ideas of the rave as being like a ceremonial space, and how you might manifest that energy or use that energy yourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we come from a culture that really sees things in a holistic way. So in that way, everything we do in life is spiritual, is connected to ceremony. But also in that way, there's ways that you don't cross things as well. So it's kind of exists in this middle space, I'll say, where yes, there's things about it that are spiritual, yes, there's things about it that are ceremonial, but not necessarily in the sense of our traditions, because our traditions are held in another really specific space. So it's like spiritual in the sense of the everyday. Spiritual in the sense that we're doing things with intention, with meaning. We're never just making a track. We're never just playing a show.
And in fact, we use that to guide us to, I guess, to what makes sense. I guess like we've gotten opportunities to collaborate with other people or to do other things for other people, and we have to kind of like go through this thing where we have to ask ourselves like, what will this do for our community, or how can this help? You know what I mean? Like, and it's if we can't find the excuse or we can't find the reason to do it, then we don't. So yeah, we use it in everyday practice in that kind of way. We're built with like this internal clock, I think, or this internal ideas. It's a way of life, and it comes out in various ways, whether it be in our decisions and what we do, to how we play music, to what music we play, to what we create.
I think a really good example is, we have Matthew Creation here, who dances with us, and one of the things I love about what him and Lunacy, our other dancers, do is that they're really blending, breaking culture and traditional dance, and they perform in different degrees of street dress and traditional regalia, going from mixing those two to being in full regalia. Matthew's not praying in those situations. He's not being in a sacred space in that sense, but he is part of that tradition, and and he is respecting those things, and the way that he acts, and the way that he conducts himself, and the way that he prepares to be in that space. Even though we're not talking about a sacred space, we're not talking about a space that is inherently spiritual, but there's always those elements of things that we have to respect and be aware of and conscious of.
We have time for one last question there at the end. Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering how you think, building on what we were just talking about your kind of spiritual compass, and how that kind of dictates the direction you head in. Now that your recent album has kind of not touched so literally on explicit powwow vocals, how has the reaction been? And it reminded me of a discussion we had yesterday with Derek of Nyege Nyege, and how he said we're listening to music that people might not initially realize is African. How has the reception been, especially in Canada, especially in bigger urban places like Toronto? How has that reception been towards your music as native productions, although it might not be so explicit?
It's pretty it's good. Like it's like what Bear was saying, like we made the music for indigenous people in the very beginning, and then when everybody showed up, it was like a big surprise for us. But like again, like Bear lived in Toronto. My production style can inherently be because I was hanging around with Toronto people. So like there's things that's happened like in I don't know, like Toronto people like it some, I guess, because maybe we're from Toronto, I guess. I don't know, like it's just that the reaction that everybody's been getting has been really awesome. Like everybody's super supportive. You either like it or you don't. But at the very end of the day, like our when we play shows, we just want everybody to have fun. It's a dance party. Like we want people to enjoy themselves. So if we don't get the crowd dancing and enjoying themselves, then we're not doing our job. So yeah.
Occasionally we have the person who wants to pigeonhole what we do, and they'll come to our show and say, "Oh, that was such a great show, but I wish you played more of your music." And you're like, Well, we played 90%, 95% of that was all originals. Oh, yeah, but I mean, you know. And they never quite want to say there wasn't powwow and 100% of the night, and I'm disappointed with that. But we get those people now and again. But I think it's specifically for those people that we have to do things that aren't always within the powwow box, that we have to be out here representing ourselves and our community to the broadest extent possible, because that's our community. We're everything you could think of.
The crazy thing that we've been doing lately, and it's something that that I can't wait to kind of further explore. I mean, we were talking about how we worked with Maori people in New Zealand, and we worked with the indigenous people in Australia. We worked with the Sami people, but lately it's been really fun. Like we remixed a track from I guess rock and roll folk singer Keith Sekola. He's this native guy, and he's artist, but he sings this iconic song that a lot of native people know called Indian Car, and we were able to remix it with his blessing, and it's been awesome, like kind of changing the narrative. Like, all right, well, we're not just gonna sample like powwow music, but we're gonna sample like native artists as well. And so like we're kind of looking into that. So we've sampled this soul funk band named Exit. We've sampled Redbone before, and they're a native band as well. So it's kind of this a funk soul band. So it's like we're kind of like going out into those realms right now, which is very, very fun from a production standpoint. It's awesome, but it's also an awesome challenge to like make powwow music fit into different genres as well. That's like the beauty of it. Like so we try to switch it up all the time and try to hit as many creative places that we can.
Well, then I think we're going to have to stop there, but I want to thank Bear and Tim from A Tribe Called Red. I want to thank CTM Festival, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you guys.